Good morning. I've arrived at the Age of Dinosaurs display. I purchased the pass for yesterday. There's a sign over there saying that the fly level was medium. Probably is. Doing the Great Australian Wave. Let's have a look what this experience is. So the first display that we come to here is what they think Banjo, the dinosaur from yesterday's Lark Quarry Stampede, looked like. So it does look like a bit of a velociraptor with those very sharp claws, long tail to counterbalance him. And those are the feet that made those marks in the sand that have now turned to stone. So I came and I checked in, and the lady suggested that I grab a hat and some water, because the whole experience is going to be about 3 hours, and she gives you a map, and then your time is allocated for each section. One to go to the canyon, one to go to the laboratory, and one to go to the collection room. So I'm allocated each hour, 9, 10 and 11, to attend one of these activities. Coffee shop, toilets, little shuttle. But what I think is the most amazing thing is the view of the jump up and then the plane, and then you can just see little dots, which is Winton over there, 22 kilometres away. So travelling down to the canyon in our electric powered buggy. Leaving the reception centre. The sign here says that this is a Diamantinosaurus matildae. Diamantina is the region, the Diamantina range. Saurus because it's a dinosaur, and Matildae because this is the area for the waltzing Matilda Banjo Patterson was written.
And this little guy is an ornithopod, so one of our smaller dinosaurs. And we've got evidence of them having lived in the district from their footprints. So Lark Quarry is one of the places where we've found many footprints from ornithopods. And based on their foot size, we've estimated their complete size, and this is what they've come up with. And ornithopods were bipedal, so on 2 legs for the most part, especially when moving quickly, especially when running. But when moving slowly, in much the same way that a frill-necked lizard reverts to 4 legs when it's moving slowly, these animals would have done the same thing.
So the cap rock here, it was the same level where the earth was completely, and even when over there onto that plain, that used to be at the same level, but erosion and wind and water has taken that away. And what's happening is the softer clay, like underneath that overhang, will be undermined, and then those rocks will fall, just like these boulders here, because these boulders would have been at the capstone as well. All these would have been much higher initially.
It's also very nice for doing a tour in here. So the 3 types we have here, on the table in front of me is Australovenator wintonensis, or Banjo. These are 2-legged theropods, so meat-eating dinosaur. Think of the Tyrannosaurus rexes and the velociraptors you might be more familiar with. Same group of dinosaurs. The big bones on the floor are Diamantinosaurus matildae, or Matilda. And then over on the side table over there, we've got Savannahsaurus elliotorum, or Wade. So Matilda and Wade are both sauropod dinosaurs, so same as our logo, long neck, long tail, walk on 4 legs and eat plants. And pretty big. There's another sauropod, so again, long tail, long neck, walked on 4 legs, ate plants. So similar to Matilda, but we do know that they are different species. There's some quite distinct differences that we can see based on the skeleton. Firstly, the hips. So what we're seeing here is the bottom half of the hips, so there would have been part over the top as well. And one side of this here is the equivalent of that one piece on the bottom there. So we can see it's a lot wider and flatter or shorter than Matilda's. She's a bit thinner and taller. So he would have had wider hips, would have been more sort of rounded barrel shape in the body, have a wider base, helps a bit with stability. Similarly, his toes are short or shorter compared to the leg length, whereas Matilda's are a little bit longer compared to leg length. So we think you would have had a shorter foot, but possibly a wider foot. So being a broader, wider animal with wider, flatter feet would have helped with stability on unstable terrain, sediments in particular, so things like mud, sand. This guy was actually found in clay or claystone. So we believe that he actually lived in a more open habitat, and where he was found we actually think represented a more open habitat. So perhaps on the shores of inland sea or lake, so where you would have that mud and sand. So that helped him to move around there and be more stable. Whereas Matilda, the environmental fossils that were found with her and Banjo when we dug them up, indicate that they were more in that open temperate forest environment, so you would have had more dense vegetation. Perhaps being a little bit skinnier might have helped to get between those. The other difference, the main distinguishing bone between these two, is this lump of what most of us would think of as rock if we saw it out in the wild. That's called an astragalus, or an ankle bone, one of the ankle bones. It's paleontologists refer to it as a diagnostic bone because it doesn't vary much within a species, but it does vary a little bit between species. So off that one bone alone, they knew they were different species straight up. Other thing I'll point out, because it was in claystone, it was a lot harder to actually prep the bones or remove them from the rock than these ones were, because they were in the siltstones, a little bit softer, a little bit easier to remove. But it was also found partly in life position, so that means that when it died, it pretty much fell to the ground and was covered quickly in that clay sediment, and that meant that it was quite well preserved in parts. In particular, these fantastic backbones or vertebrae right here. Paleontologists refer to those as pristine. So we've still got all the processes, all the bony bits sticking up off them. If you compare those to the Matildas on the floor over here, we're missing a lot of those. They're quite pitted, quite worn.
This is Mr. David Elliott. So he's a third generation sheep and cattle grazier in the Winton region. And he was out mustering a mob of sheep out on his Belmont station, about 60 k's in that direction. And he stumbled across a set of funny looking bones. Now he's a farmer, he knows what bones look like. He's very quickly come to the conclusion that this is cow, bullock, sheep, kangaroo, pig, horse, you name it. And pretty savvy with the history of the area. He knows dinosaurs were being found out here in Western Queensland. So he's come to the conclusion that this must be a dinosaur bone. So he did what any normal man would do. Scooped up those bones, took them home and dumped them on his dining room table, which you can imagine went over wonderfully. But he wanted to find out what kind of a dinosaur he had. So we sent pictures of these specimens off to Queensland Museum in Brisbane. And at that stage, dinosaur fossils in Australia were very, very rare. So when they got word that someone might have found one out on their station, they were very excited, got back to them very quickly and said, "Yes, David, you've discovered yourself a dinosaur bone, in particular a sauropod." So just like this fella up on the logo, and Matilda and Wade, you would have met in the collection room. Now, the museum themselves, they got quite a hustle on, came out to David's station, went to the surface and just below, cleaned up all the bones they thought they had. They were a little disappointed to find that not all the bones were there, and themselves. So as you can see here, we've done that. You can kind of get the general shape of the dinosaur bone. Now once we get to those bones, they are unfortunately very fragile. They can flake away and break very easily. So to make sure that that doesn't happen anymore, we actually coat the entire bone and even some of the surrounding rock in a very special museum grade glue called paraloid, which is essentially just super glue and acetone mixed together. We coat the bones in that and it gives them a bit of strength and stops them from breaking any further. No? Yeah, is that a nodding? Yeah. So these jackets on the wall look a little bit familiar to you. So that's the exact same thing that the doctors wrap your arm in, and it serves the same purpose. It keeps those bones free from breaking and keeps them nice and stiff so they don't move. Now, we're using a few more layers than the general GP does, because he's obviously not wrapping your arm up in alfoil. But this is what we do. This is our first layer. We put that over the bones themselves to keep them dry from any harsh chemicals and safe from anything else that would be in the plaster and the newspaper. Now the newspaper is our second layer. We soak this in water and we wrap that around. So this gives the plaster something to stick to, and it also slows down that drying process so the plaster doesn't dry too hard or too quickly. If it dries too quickly, it will crack, and then what's the point? And then the last layer is hessian strips dipped into that plaster and wrapped around the bone itself and left to dry. Then we flip it, repeat the process on the other side. So even some of these jackets are a unique group called the pterosaurs. So they're the flying reptiles. Much like you see that fella over there in that corner of that painting. Yeah. But he belongs to a very special group of pterosaurs called the ornithochorans. So these guys have very long, slender, thin skulls. And at the very end of that skull, right at the end of it, both the top and bottom jaw, he would have had a round crest. He could have used this for display, or he even could have used this to help him steer while he was flying. Now, inside that mouth was very sharp, conical teeth, and some of them are still embedded in the jaw, which is absolutely incredible. Then we've got some loose ones over here. Now these teeth are conically shaped and are absolutely perfect for plucking wet, slippery fish out of the water. Now, he is one of only 3 species of pterosaur we've discovered in Australia, and he's the most complete at 10%. It's just adapted to flying. They've evolved very thin and very hollow bones. Much lighter than a bird would be of his size. It makes him a lot easier to stay in the air, so he doesn't have to spend so much energy. So these sauropods comprise about 95% of the animals we find out here. And that's because of their big, robust bones. They can survive that black soil rotation a little better than but this one here, this is Trixie. So this is the upper thigh bone. Now what makes her so special is that this bone has come up out of the ground in one whole piece. So this hasn't been broken up. The black soil hasn't seeped into any cracks, pushed them apart. This is just one whole piece, and it's come out of the ground like that, which is absolutely extraordinary. Now we can use more complete specimens from other sauropods around the world to figure out how big she would have been. And at the hip, she would have stood taller than that black tarp behind her there. So quite an enormous animal. But as sauropods go, that's still pretty small. Now in that cabinet there we have Mick. So he's the exact opposite of Trixie, because Mick has come up out of the ground in about 1,000 different little pieces. And we've painstakingly pieced back in Argentina. But when you take into fact that that is probably 3 times the size of this, and everything that you see here is in this one little strip of shed, that's pretty remarkable. And that's because of our extraordinary volunteer program. So just like we have our Digger Dino experience, we have our Prepper Dino experience. And this is where members of the general public can come in and get hands-on with these fossils and see some of the first items here. But with most of these press layers together, so the smallest tool we have is over here. So this is our micro jack. Now this is the finest tool we have, and we use this one for that very fine detailing on the bones. This one has a little bit more of a twist than it does.
So that was absolutely fabulous. Got to see Judy being unearthed by the ladies there with their very fine tools. So that is the 3rd part of the dinosaur experience out here at the jump up at Winton.